Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Impact Factor for 2023. I am your host, Katie Van Aken, and this week I'm excited to share with you a conversation I had back in 2022 with two people, Karlie Pollock and Keegan Hoag, who are in between their undergraduate and PhD pursuits, and tell us a little bit about their experience right now and some of their expectations for once they start their PhD degrees. So I hope you enjoy. Let's jump in. So I'm here today with Keegan Hoag and Karlie Pollock. They are both undergraduates, class of 2022. And they're both sort of in the same cycle of working in between their undergraduate and graduate programs, and are soon to be applying for some PhD program positions. So Karlie and Keegan, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So, all right. So this is the first time we're doing a double interview, but I think it'll be cool because no offense, but you don't have a ton to say about your experience as a PhD student yet, which is great because we'll just have you back, in a couple years to reflect on this lovely conversation we're about to have. But so let's start with Keegan. What was your undergraduate major, and where did you study?
So I went to Haverford College, graduated 2022. I was a psych major, econ minor, and I didn't start my psych classes until beginning of my junior year. So I was a little bit late to my major, but was able to graduate on time with that degree.
Interesting. So, did you have another major in mind originally?
Yeah, I was originally an econ major and
Okay.
really realized I didn't like it. And by the time I switched to the psych major, I just automatically had the econ minor because I was so far into the
Of
major.
course.
Yeah.
Very cool. Very cool. Karlie, what about you?
I was a psych major and a double minor in neuroscience and health studies. And I was kind of the opposite of Keegan, where I went into college. Also, class of 2022 at Haverford College. Went into college knowing I wanted to be a psych major, and kind of the neuroscience and health studies just fell into place based on the types of classes that I was taking, but very heavily knew that I was going to be a psych major.
And with the psych degree, but the minors, is there the ability in the psych program at Haverford to sort of tailor it to your interests that sort of are clear in your minors? It's for either of you.
Yeah, I thought it was really easy to do that. That's kind of how I discovered the other minors. I was more interested in the neuro part of the psych major, and so that's kind of how the neuro minor came about. But I knew I didn't want to do any of the hard sciences. I didn't want to take chemistry or biology, but I was still interested in like neuroanatomy and things like that. So that's kind of where the neuro minor came about, and then the health studies minor kind of overlaps with a lot of the STEM field. So I kind of just got that one because of the classes that I was taking. But specifically the psych major, you kind of could gear it towards what part of psych you liked. So you could take classes that were more social psych heavy, developmental psych. I kind of stayed more in the neuro part of it. So a lot of cognitive neuroscience, behavioral neuroscience, things like that. And I think Keegan did roughly the same thing.
Yeah. I would say for econ majors, econ minors, there were definitely a lot of psychology classes that were tailored towards maybe like more marketing, kind of thinking about how consumers think. That's just not the route I wanted to take. I ended up taking neuroscience in the spring of my junior year and just fell in love with it. But at that point, I was a little bit too late to pick up that neuro minor, sadly. But was able to do a neuro thesis and was really happy and excited to be able to do that.
Cool. Well, this is great. You just mentioned thesis, so we'll just roll right along. So when you were an undergrad, Keegan, we can start with you. What was your experience doing research? Did you have a lot of opportunities, and sort of what was its focus?
So I didn't do any research leading into my thesis senior year, just because I was so late into the game. I didn't really realize until pretty late that I wanted to do neuroscience. So I thought I would do a neuro thesis and see how I like doing research in neuro, and then ended up loving my thesis experience. And I just knew after thesis that I wanted to continue in neuro research, I would say.
Cool. And what was your focus for that thesis?
Yeah, so it was observing how sex hormones or the withdrawal of sex hormones following like pregnancy, how that affects anxiety like and compulsive like behavior in mice, and then also looking at this transcription factor called delta phosphB and like its expression in the nucleus accumbens. So kind of looking at like reward pathways in a way.
Hmm.
Yeah,
So you to work with mice. That's always
yeah.
like kind of tough research to do, right?
Yeah, but it was really great experience because I work with mice on a daily basis now with my current job,
Mm,
and I think that was a big thing on my resume that my current employers really liked.
cool. All right. Well, we'll circle back to that because I want to talk about that too. But, um, Karlie, what was your experience doing research as an undergrad?
Once again, my experience was pretty much the opposite of Keegan's. Because I knew I wanted to be a psych major, I kind of wanted to jump into research. I didn't have a lot of experience with research coming out of high school, but it's definitely something that I gravitated more towards. So I spent our freshman year kind of just taking psych classes and figuring out like what part of psychology I actually was interested in. Um, and then starting the summer in between freshman and sophomore year, I interned in a psychology lab at the University of Miami that worked with a population was pediatric, a pediatric population that had autism and kind of like neurocorrelates of that. There was some imaging involved. So that kind of made me interested in data collection, things like that. So then I continued our sophomore year. I was also working with mice in a mouse lab. I worked in a behavioral neuroscience lab. And I was kind of just like the mouse keeper at that point because I was the youngest one, kind of supporting the seniors in the lab. So I would do a lot of like the feeding, data collection, things like that. And then COVID happened. And I was still in the same lab, but the next year, our junior year, kind of it turned more into taking. We didn't work with the mice that year, but it turned into taking the research from the previous year and doing more of the analysis part of that. So I kind of got the rat experience 1 year, and then more of the data and analysis part the second year. So I discovered I didn't want to work with mice in the future, and that I did like the data part of it. And then going into senior year, I was also in a neuroscience lab, but I was in a cognitive neuroscience lab that worked with EEG. And so my topic was all about neurocorrelates of mind wandering and if it impacts mood and performance and reaction time and things like that. So really interesting, but kind of knew that that wasn't exactly the field that I wanted to be in. I picked cognitive neuroscience because it was the closest to what my interests were, and it wasn't involving any animals. But I kind of wanted to narrow in more on what my actual interests were. So I did do an internship the summer before my thesis, so the summer going into senior year at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia with a neuropsychologist doing data entry. It was kind of still during COVID, so I didn't have any clearance to do patient contact. So I worked a lot with actual pediatric data and clinical data. So that was kind of my first exposure to that, and I really fell in love with it. So that's kind of more of what I was going for, but I picked the cognitive neuroscience thesis because I thought it was the closest one.
Interesting. So two things I wanted to say. First, tell me that you have the words mouse keeper on your resume for that job.
Not those
Not
specific
specifically.
terms. I think I have
Okay.
better terms.
Well, I would definitely consider adding that because I think it sounds legit. And also a little bit like, I don't know, like it just sounds like a job. Like it sounds cool. Anyway,
So it was a full-time job.
and the second thing was you mentioned mind wandering. What is that?
So we're kind of looking at what we classified mind wandering, but the topic of mind wandering is very debated in the field of psychology, apparently. But my thesis advisor happened to have an open project in mind wandering, so that's kind of how I got started with it. So it's kind of like not your. There's two different types. There's like your conscious, like, oh, I'm like doing a boring task, or I'm like in class, and I'm wanting to like productively think about something else because it's what my current task is boring. And then there's like the unconscious, like I'm driving home and somehow I end up getting home, but I don't remember how I did it. So there's like two different kinds. There's like kind of like deliberate and then like spontaneous mind wandering. So we were kind of looking at both of them in like separate ways. So we had people watch a boring video. One of them was a boring video, and one of them was like a happy dog video. And then we had them do a boring task afterwards, and kind of see like if their mind wandered, and we kind of probed them throughout the 30 minutes that we had them sitting there, asking them if they were mind wandering and about what.
Very cool. Well, I could ask more questions, but I won't. Let's move on. So Keegan, it sounds like you late in your process discovered your sort of interest in neuroscience, but because you didn't get a chance to do all this, you're sort of at that point where you're like, I want to keep learning and I want to learn more, and that is sort of propelling you into your PhD. Is that accurate?
Yeah, I will say the nice thing, I work at Penn right now, so the nice thing about working at Penn is being able to take classes on the side.
Oh.
So I can only really take one class a semester with having a full-time like work schedule, and with how their classes line up with my work schedule. I can really only take one class at a time. So I'm gonna be at Penn for a while, and that's kind of one thing I'm a little apprehensive about is spending too much time taking classes before I get into like apply to PhD programs. I don't want to be like 3-4 years out of school before I apply. But with the classes I need to take, I might need to wait an extra maybe year than I thought I would.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And do you have any sense of, so the reason I'm asking this question is because, there are some careers that sort of require a PhD to pursue, one being like a practicing psychologist or a professor. So do you have any sense of what you want to do with your PhD later? And it's okay if you don't.
Yeah. I know I want to study pharmacology, specifically like psychopharmacology, how drugs
Oh,
can
cool.
affect mood and anxiety disorders. And so I feel like I would need to get a PhD. I've looked into it a bit, and definitely to get a decent job in the field, you would need to get a PhD. I think part of it is like knowing how to set up and conduct like an experiment or a study that kind of goes along with that. But other than that, I think at the moment I'm more focused on going into like industry rather than academia. I don't see myself as a professor, but that might be some imposter syndrome. But I think working with like a biotech startup would be really cool at some point, kind of putting in maybe some of my economic experience. Hopefully it doesn't all go to waste, but I can like maybe apply it to a biotech startup at some point, while also doing pharmacology research that I want to do. So yeah, I think that's the route I'm thinking about now. Obviously, that can all change once I get to
Yeah.
grad school. So I'm completely open to wherever grad school really takes me. But I I do think it is going to be a necessary thing for me to do to have the career that I want to have at some point. My advisor definitely told me don't get a PhD just to say you have a PhD. Like make sure you have
Yeah.
a reason behind it. So that's definitely something I've thought about a lot. And if I can avoid going to grad school for 6 years, I would do that, get a master's instead. But I think I'll have to go for the whole
Yeah.
PhD program. Yeah.
Yeah, that is good advice, right? 6 years is a long time to spend on something that you
Yeah.
don't really love. But it can also be really exciting if it is something that you love and it's going to take
Mm,
you to where you want to be. So I interviewed a few weeks ago, I interviewed my mom who has her PhD in psychology from the 80s. And it was interesting to hear her say that she wanted to be a practicing clinical psychologist, which she is. But she had to get a PhD. At the time, it was like you had to get a PhD to do that. Even though she was spending all this time doing her research, she didn't um, see herself doing any of that for her career. So it was sort of like a means to an end. Um, and I think, some of that, it sounds like some of that hasn't really changed in the world of psychology, um, but it was interesting to hear that because I feel like the reasons that people pursue it are often practical, and that's exactly what you're saying. Now, have you had some
mm.
experience with the pharmacology stuff, or where did that interest come from?
So I do. So I would say, in a way, my thesis was kind of pharmacology. We were looking more at hormones, but in a way, like hormones and neurotransmitters kind of act in similar ways in the brain. Um, I think mood and anxiety disorder is a big problem within my family, within my community, people I
Mm,
surround myself with, and I've just seen a lot of people go on medication and it just doesn't do anything. And so I just want to do research in that field just to see what I can contribute to that kind of research.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's great. That's great. I love that.
Mm, mm.
All right, so hopping back to you, Karlie. So did you share with us at what point did you decide you wanted to get your PhD?
Um, I would say pretty early on, maybe like sophomore year of college. Um, I think I started taking more psych classes. I knew I was going to be a psych major. Started taking neuro classes, and then COVID happened. And over the COVID summer, I think that's what really like shifted my perspective. I kind of had a career crisis during the summer, even though we were so young, but kind of just had a lot of time to think about my future, and I didn't really have like a solid plan, and I think that scared me a little bit. So
Yeah.
I spent the summer networking a lot. I used like all of Haverford's alumni databases, um, and I had a lot of phone calls, a lot of email exchanges, and I actually talked to this one woman, and I think she was the one that actually shifted my perspective, because I think I have a lot of interest in research and practice, and all of these other like subtopics, but I couldn't really find a job or like a thought um, of what a job might look like for me in the future. Kind of couldn't put all of my interests together. And this one networking call that I had, this woman actually described what she does in a field that I didn't know existed, which was neuropsychology.
Hmm.
And she said she was a neuropsychologist or is getting her PhD in neuropsychology, and kind of described to me what that entailed. And I was like, wow, like this is literally what I want to do with my life. And you just explained it to a T, and I didn't know this existed. So then I kind of started researching more about it, and I took the GRE like 3 months later because I was like, this is what I want to do,
Wow.
and I was kind of set after that.
That's awesome. Did neuropsychology, does that have anything, well, can you explain that more? But also, let's start there. Can you explain what that is more?
It's kind of just the interaction between like obviously neuro and psychology. Um, I think what more of my interest lies in is I want to be able to do research, but I also want to be able to be like a practicing psychologist, but I didn't want to do any type of like counseling or therapy. I didn't want that to be like my main focus in like my practice. Um, and so before I even heard about this, I started doing research and I started looking at different hospitals and just reading like bios of neuropsychologists. And it kind of involves a lot of like assessments. They do a lot of like ADHD diagnosis. Um, and when I kind of was like a little skeptical. I was like, wow, you described my perfect job description, but didn't really know what it entailed until I interned at CHOP the summer before my senior year. I interned for a neuropsychologist and kind of just observed her everyday life. And I was like, wow, this is exactly what I want to do. And what I was most interested in, I think my like biggest interest within neuropsychology is head trauma and concussions and things like that. And she kind of combined, she sees patients like a normal psychologist does, but is also able to do different assessments and kind of give them more of like a solid treatment plan about how like internal thoughts and like behavioral health problems influence like your daily actions and like daily life. So that's kind of what I liked more about it than normal like clinical psychology, because I knew I couldn't see myself being a therapist or a counselor.
Interesting. Yeah, I can see why it's sort of hard to explain what it is, and also like hard to imagine. I don't know. It's like it feels abstract, but it's not, right? Like your example of the concussions is like an applied you're like applied to a specific thing that happens in the real world with people, but there's also a huge like research and exploration component to the topic.
Yeah. So I'll give you another example because I think my other example is a little vague. So the project that I worked on the summer that I interned at CHOP, I was kind of looking at all of the data that this neuropsychologist collected with all of her patients in the last like 3-ish years. We noticed that all of the kids that she saw were concussions. They were coming back like 6 to 12 months post concussion injury, reporting the same concussion symptoms. And in the field of concussion, concussions don't, unless it's like a traumatic brain injury, concussions don't last 6 months. Concussion symptoms don't last 6 months. So the symptoms that they were reporting were obviously valid, but they're not from the initial concussion. So then we kind of like worked through her data and things like that. And I found a correlation between behavioral health problems and these concussion symptoms. So kids who didn't have behavioral health treatment prior to the concussion reported more concussion symptoms, like further out from injury. And there was also some interesting like correlations with an ADHD diagnosis as well. So kind of combining like that, the behavioral health part of it and like actual practice.
That's cool. That's very cool. So I know the answer to this already, but I'm gonna let you talk about it. So correct me if I'm wrong, but that's what you're doing now, correct? Or related to what you're doing now.
So right now I'm a clinical research assistant in the Minds Matter concussion program at CHOP, the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. And yeah, I work pretty much like half the week in our concussion clinic. So I follow the providers around in the clinic, and we screen patients who are eligible for research. I work with the other coordinators and research assistants, and we consent the participants, and we do any of the assessments that the different studies entail in clinics. So that's what I do half the week, and then the other half of the week I do a lot of data entry, data abstraction, and I'm trying to further my way into the data group kind of that does more of the analysis piece, because I think I have more of an interest in that part of it I'm discovering. So yeah.
Cool. Hey, that's a benefit of doing this ahead of your PhD, is sort of honing those interests even more. So that's cool.
No,
Keegan, what are you doing? What are you doing right now?
I'm currently working in the neurology department at Penn in an epilepsy and Alzheimer's lab. And so my project I'm working on is more of an Alzheimer's focused project, but it's looking at how seizures can kind of spread this protein called tau throughout the brain. And tau is a protein that's heavily implicated in Alzheimer's, neurodegenerative diseases. So it's also kind of like a pharmacology lab also, because sometimes we'll get drugs that we'll test for companies, and see how they affect the spread of this protein or other proteins, or how they affect seizures, some behavioral aspects. Um, so this is like kind of my perfect ideal job that I wanted to get out of school, basically. It's really teaching me a lot of lab techniques, teaching me a lot of like behind the scenes, what goes on in research, and kind of has given me more confidence when it comes to PhD, like grad school and PhD programs, because I'm doing a lot of the lab work on a day-to-day basis. I'm just not doing a lot of maybe like the reading, the writing, the background research. Um, but it's really cool to see everything that goes into research like this. Yeah.
Yeah. And the important thing is it's not scaring you away from
Yeah.
your original plan, right?
Yeah. It's making me like it even more, which is great.
Well, that's great.
Yeah.
So this is for both of you, but Keegan, maybe you can go first. Um, you know, it sounds like both of you are doing something very similar to where you want to be in a PhD program, like topically. Are there any sort of like skills or tools that you're sort of learning in your current jobs that you think will sort of let you hit the ground running in your PhD program?
Yeah. I think just being in a lab, obviously I only had time in the lab for thesis. So I'm in the lab all day, every day, 40 like hours a week. So it's really teaching me time management in the lab, multitasking in the lab. While I have like one experiment going, I can be off doing a different experiment and come back to that. So a lot of time management, learning how to do things in the lab, how a lab works, like ordering supplies, stuff like that. Um, so yeah, it's really teaching me a lot of things
Like
I need
lab
to know.
skills.
Lab
Yeah.
skills mostly,
Yeah.
yeah.
Cool. Karlie, anything from your side?
I would say the biggest thing is organization. Because obviously a PhD and like your dissertation takes a long time, and a lot of work goes into it. And kind of just being able to organize all the different materials that you collect and all the data that you collect, kind of being able to formulate that into like your final dissertation. But in my case, currently, it's being able to express it to patients in like a concise way. Um, yeah, probably just the explanations of things and how to speak to people. Yeah, in research, because I think the field of like research in general is just there's a lot of unknown, and people are really skeptical to engage in research, specifically like in a pediatric population. Um, so kind of learning how to express what you're trying to say to parents, to kids, in a way that they'll understand everything that you're saying and want to participate.
Yeah. That's so true. And I feel like, you have to build that trust. And so you're let alone your ability to do research, right? You have that human component because of the fact that you're working with patients, which is certainly as a engineering PhD student, like there was no humans involved, and if they were also engineers, so it was fine. But yeah, that's different. Cool. Um, so I wanted to ask you guys, since you're kind of far out from starting a program, but you've clearly thought about it a lot. Is there something that you are nervous or apprehensive about when it comes to your PhD journey that is upcoming? Karlie, maybe you want to start?
Yeah, I can go first. I don't think I'm actually nervous for the actual program itself. I think I'm more nervous about like moving to a new place and like essentially like starting over, like having your essential like college experience in like a better way, but all over again, like later on in life, because it's not like college where people just go like straight from high school and are kind of like in the same position. Like people in grad school and PhD programs are not in the same like stage of life, and position in general. So I think just like finding like my little comfort zone in that, and figuring out like how that all works.
Would you go anywhere like in the country, or do you like have a preference?
I mean, ideally, I would love to be in Florida or Philly, but I'll go wherever I get accepted.
Heard it here first. Keegan, anything for you?
Yeah, I never thought about Carly's point about the social aspect of it all and everyone kind of being different ages. So maybe I'm nervous about that now a little bit, but I would mostly say just the fact like I have a feeling it's going to be maybe a little hard going back to school, giving up a salary. I know I'll have a stipend, but going back to school, a little worried about how long it's going to take. I'm very, very sure that this is what I want to do. So I know like if I have to spend a couple extra years taking classes before I apply to make myself a competitive applicant, then that's what it's going to take. But yeah, a little nervous about how long the whole entire experience is going to take me. And then also just kind of worried about getting into a program and then kind of realizing this isn't what I want to do. Like I said, I'm very, very sure that this is what I want to do, but I also know of a lot of people who go to grad school and get a little burnt out on research, and end up coming out of a PhD program in biology or neuroscience and just like they don't like being in a lab at the end of it. And so I'm a little worried about that, but so far I really enjoy being in the lab space, working with people in the lab, working with mice, with whatever I get to do in the lab. So yeah.
Well, those are, I'm sure, very common concerns. And you didn't ask for my advice, but here it is. So, as far as the social aspect goes, um, yes, people are coming from different sort of stages in life, but in my experience and people that I've talked to, there's always sort of like that cohort that you start with, and you're sort of going through the milestones together, and that is a really important sort of social dynamic to foster early on. And whether you like spend all your free time with these people or not, they're going through it just like you, and so it's nice to have that. It's sort of like a default social experience that you would get as an 18-year-old going to college as well, but just with different goals. Um, so, but yeah, I think you guys will be fine. Um, and then before we get to my last question, I want to find out a little bit more about your um, non-psychologist nerdy research sides. So I will warn you that you will lose a little bit of free time when you stop working and going to grad school because you'll be working a lot and you won't have time to do some fun things. So I guess my question is, what do you guys do for fun now? What are your hobbies, things that you do outside of work? Keegan, let's start with you.
Right. I've been since moving to Philly, I've been biking a lot more. It is kind of weird because being in college, I like always had class and work or homework, so I never felt like I had hobbies. But I'm trying to pick up like cycling more, getting on the Schuylkill River Trail, taking that as far as I can sometimes. Cooking a lot more. I have a lot more time in the afternoon to like just cook a dinner. It could be something simple, but just the act of cooking is kind of fun for me. And I try to get outdoors as much as I can, and go camping sometimes up in the Poconos. That's been a good time since moving to Philly. But yeah, I would say so. Those are some of the main things.
Nice. Well, try to keep those in your life when you start studying as well, because
Mm.
it's good to keep that variety. And I remember when I finished my PhD and someone asked me like, "What do you do for fun?" And I was like, "What do you mean?" Like exactly the same thing. Like I you just like lose sort of all of the things that you had been doing as a kid and been interested in. And so I'm now getting them back about 5 years later. COVID was actually really helpful for that. Um, but it's definitely valuable. Karlie, what about you?
Kind of in the same boat as Keegan. Love to do outdoors things. I feel like I run a lot. I see Keegan running a lot too, on the Schuylkill River Trail. Um, I recently picked up kickboxing, so I
Oh,
do love kickboxing. Yeah, and I play in a soccer league with you, which has been so fun, minus the part where I broke my wrist. But
Yes.
yeah,
Ups and downs for sure.
Yeah, anything like active. I try to go on my daily after work walk or run, just to like get out and feel like a normal person again.
And the kickboxing can be valuable when you have an experiment go badly, for example, just take it out, get rid of that anger.
No, I'm so excited to punch the bag every time I walk
You're
in.
prepped. Yeah. I have a feeling you're going to get your entire like research group like into kickboxing, if it goes well.
Wouldn't be upset about that.
Yeah, sounds great. Maybe you can get your PI to install a bag, just like for a little relief.
Yeah, maybe the kids will punch it.
Everybody. Yeah. Okay, well that's cool. I'm glad to hear you guys have some non-work related hobbies, and I encourage you to continue them as much as you can. All right, so my last question I've been asking most of my guests is for those who have graduated or are currently in their program, some advice that they would give to their first year self. And since we are pre-first year for you guys, I want to flip it a little bit and say, what advice would you give to yourself either back in undergrad or, a year ago, in this journey of career path and PhD that you think would be good to know? Karlie, you first.
I think I would tell myself to not rush. I think just like the end of college, like franticness, like what am I gonna do with the rest of my life kicked in. And I was really eager to like start a PhD program right out of college. And now like in a year in the future, I'm like I could never imagine myself being in a PhD program right now. Like I've learned so much in just the last 6 months. That would definitely help me in the PhD program, but just like in life. So yeah, I think just saying like don't be in so much of a rush and you don't have to have your whole life figured out like by the time you graduate college.
Yeah, spoken from someone who had a career crisis at 20 years old, right?
But now I'm telling my younger self that the crisis was not needed.
Yeah. That's good. That's good. That's good advice. Keegan, what about you?
I would have told my first year self that I liked psychology and neuroscience and to do it earlier, but also maybe along the way get involved in some like science extracurriculars. There was a student run science journal at Haverford called Jolt, I believe, and I think that would have been really cool to be involved with as an undergrad. And also kind of with what Karlie was saying, like not to rush through things. It's my career. Like I have my own path. I don't have to stick to like, 2 years of research, then PhD, and then this, and then that. I have the ability to make my own path. It doesn't have to be in a certain time window. And yeah, maybe not to stress as much about it. It's hard work, but it's definitely we're capable of doing it.
Yeah. Well, we have this on record now so that when you guys are stressed in your PhD program, you can just go back and listen to your own voice telling you that the crisis is not, the worry is not worth it. So, all right, well, that's all my questions. Anything you guys want to like plug? Are you like, I don't know, publishing a cool study or like, it's okay if you don't.
I think my thesis is getting published.
Okay.
So keep an eye out for some publications from Laura Bean. I should have, I think, one at least coming sometime soon.
Just keep plugging Laura Bean in this.
Yeah, everybody. Yeah, Laura Bean is the best. She wasn't my
thesis advisor, but she's the best.
Psych professor at Harvard, I imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone check out Laura Bean's work, and specifically Keegan's coming up.
Be great.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for spending the time. This was really cool, and I'm hoping this episode is, useful for people, especially who are either in your position or about to be in your position. And I hope the advice lands as well. And it's just good to kind of think about it retroactively about how you got here and also like where you're headed. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Great to have you.
Thanks.
Thanks to Keegan and Karlie for coming on the show. If you or someone you know wants to be interviewed on Impact Factor, feel free to reach out via Instagram and follow us for updates at @ImpactFactorPod. Thank you all for listening and have a great week.